Hello and welcome to the Product Breakfast Club podcast by Aj&Smart, where each episode we bring you a fresh and insightful chat between designer and co-founder of Aj&Smart, Jonathan Courtney, and Jake Knapp, the New York Times best-selling author of design process book Sprint. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Jake has set it so that John gets a little electric shock each time you do. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to like, share or comment. We love hearing your feedback.
All right, so welcome to episode 3 of the Product Breakfast podcast. No, wait, it's actually the Product Breakfast Club podcast. It's good, we got it.
That name's going to totally stick.
It's going to stick. Welcome to episode 3 of the Product Breakfast Club podcast.
If you're watching this, can you put the name of this show in the comments? So we know what it is.
We need to know what the name of the show is. We're still in San Francisco. We're still here at Jake's house. He hasn't let us out. It's getting pretty creepy.
Except to go and fetch him croissants. Fetch. That's the operative word.
You're welcome. So, for anyone who hasn't heard this podcast before,
you're lucky.
Yeah, you are very lucky. This podcast is, you know what? I'm going to say that all in the pre-recorded intro that I'm going to make. So let's just do a quick introduction round, starting with Michael.
Michael here from Aj&Smart, product designer and man who brings good stuff out.
I'm Jake Knapp. I am a writer and designer.
What book did you write, Jake? Do you happen to have that?
Oh, do I?
Here.
Oh, look, it's right here. I wrote this book called Sprint. It is about the design sprint.
I need to have a book so I can kind of hold that up. Maybe I wrote... So my name is Jonathan Courtney, also co-founder of Aj&Smart with Michael, and I wrote the 4-Hour Work Week.
Oh, wow.
Under the pseudonym of Timothy Ferriss. So yeah, I'm Tim Ferriss actually. You thought he would be a lot more muscular and jacked, but
turns out none of that stuff works.
Yeah, he's not. Yeah, exactly. Those supplements are really doing a good job. So I know that we're kind of crowded around the screen here if you're watching this on YouTube, but this was the best we could do, and I think it's
physically uncomfortable here. I mean,
it's fine.
We're very quite close to each other.
Yeah,
it's good because we're ramblers, so you can be sure that this one is going to be a short episode.
Definitely. If you're on YouTube, you can also see the timer in the background here, a very nice white timer, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using that to make sure that this episode doesn't go too long. We're going to try to have maybe the cadence of a couple of long episodes and a couple of short episodes, but let's see how that...
it's all the prototypes.
It's all a prototype. We don't know. We don't know what you like. We don't know if you like the long ones or the short ones.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so this one's going to be a very specific one, focused just on one single topic, and it came about, I guess, over the last. I mean, this since you released the book, but also over the last year or so, and especially over the last few weeks on Twitter. There's been a bit of a flaring up of controversy relating to the design sprint process and how that deals with user research.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of very well-known and famous designers, very accomplished designers, are not happy with how the sprint treats user research or how fast the design sprint is, and it seems to be coming across that the design sprint is almost like a little bit insulting to the classic design processes.
Yeah.
So maybe let's just open the floor on that topic. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think that there are a couple of sort of competing criticisms, or maybe they're on the same side. But one of them is, if you don't start with research, then how can you know you're on the right track? That's cutting out this huge important thing. And the other criticism, I think, is that just the idea that you would try to hurry up design sort of cheapens design, and it takes away all this great, long, slow work that has to happen to do great design. So I think some people are actually reacting to even just the popularity of this term, design sprint, which is spread around quite a bit, which is great. And I think that it sounds like we're trying to hurry things up. And if you haven't taken the time, and I suspect that some of the criticism does come from some folks who maybe haven't actually taken the time to look at what we're talking about, it sounds like we're trivializing it and really trying to press it down and get that part over with so that we can turn everything over to some engineering process or something. That's the impression that I've sort of gotten from it. And I think that we should maybe talk about both of those, but the part about hurrying up design and trivializing design, I don't think will take too long to talk about, because I just don't think there's much of an argument there. I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that when you start in this way, you're actually bringing everyone together to make sure that what you're going to spend your effort on is something you have confidence in, that it's something that people are going to be interested in and care about, and that after you've established that there's some product market fit there, you're still going to spend a lot of time designing it, getting it right, doing all of that fine-tuned detail. I think that there's no sort of cutting out all of the hard design work that has to happen over the course of building a product. Right. I don't think that that's what we've ever suggested. So I just don't, I haven't even really gotten into that argument, because I feel like it's sort of a surface level knee-jerk reaction to that term becoming popular and that term threatening, when people feel that they're threatened with the way that they do design work. So, I mean, if you guys want, we can talk more about it, but I don't feel like there's a lot there. I do feel like there is a lot there with the research question, because we actually, while writing the book, we had at Google Ventures, some internal conversations or sort of arguments about, they were friendly arguments, but about whether to talk about how we would often do research before the sprint. So a lot of times my colleague Michael, who's an excellent researcher, would go and do...
This Michael?
Different Michael Margolis. I mean, this Michael's excellent as well. But Michael Margolis would go and do research with the startups before our sprint, and he would, on day one of the sprint, say, hey, here's what I learned, and share that with us. And it was like we were already doing the second sprint. We were already so far ahead because of what we had learned. And I don't talk about that in the book. I don't talk about that usually when I talk about sprints until somebody asks the question. And that's because I think that very few teams have someone like Michael Margolis or Michael Smart, or someone who's experienced doing customer research and can do that in a really great way and then deliver it to people in a really great way. And traditionally, when people talk about design thinking, there's been this encouragement that, if you go and you just start talking to people, these things will emerge and you'll come up with some great solution. And I haven't seen evidence of that. I've seen when someone who's a great researcher can go out, learn things, and then if they're also a great communicator, can share that back. But I've seen that fall down more times than it doesn't. So if you have someone who's really good, or if your team is willing to go together and do this research ahead of time, it's great. But not every team can do it. And it does mean, too, that if you're in this situation where you're trying to level up the way your team does product design and the way your team innovates, you're now talking about we're going to do this research process and this design sprint. You're asking people to take on even a bigger chunk, and often even the week is hard to do. Yeah. Whereas if you do the whole sprint, by the end of the sprint week, you will do customer research, because in just 5 days later, you'll be doing research. Oftentimes, you're going to find when you do that research that it's so much easier to conduct those interviews. Personally, I'm not a good interviewer, but I can do it if there's a prototype. If you give me a prototype, then the prototype helps me and allows me to actually do the kind of interview that'll be educational to our team. I can't do that on my own. If I go out and do it on my own, I'm not skilled enough. And so it also, I think it's been meant to open the doors to a lot of teams to doing research and to get people in the room watching the research, so you don't have this poor researcher going out there doing the research and then trying to convince everybody else. So the sprint is kind of a Trojan horse for research. Right. If you can do it ahead of time, it's great, but I don't think that you absolutely have to. Anyway, I could go on and on about that subject.
I think that was really nice. One thing, by the way, can you two guys stop rubbing your pants legs? Because this thing is super sensitive, and I can just hear this. Okay. Yeah, it's really good.
Should we start it over again?
No.
Was it creepy?
It was creepy, but I liked it.
Okay, good.
But I think that's a really First of all, that's a really nice, clean answer. I think that let's just pretend the design sprint doesn't exist, and people are still kind of, the whole user research thing still has a lot of problems within companies, because there's one side who want to do this very extensive, month or 2 month or 3 month long user research sessions where they start, doing, interviewing their potential customers, giving them diaries. We've done all of this stuff.
And I think in some instances it is necessary.
Oh, it is.
Absolutely.
If you're trying to capture patterns that aren't clear from like first time users and things like that. You do need to live somehow with these people and these products over time.
I think it does paralyze the larger companies who are trying to just get into product work in the first place, like companies who are like, we're going to make our first product, or we're just going to, digitally transform. And they immediately get struck with this design thinking approach to, okay, now we need to do the research. And what happens is the designers go and they do whatever version of research they see fit. And then it's not in any way, it's like packaged up maybe into a PDF, or it's packaged up, it's put on the walls. And this is something that's really hard for them to translate into product features.
Yeah.
And I think that I've never seen, like you said, there are some really excellent, really talented teams, but I've never seen a good team being able to take that research and turn that logically into features. What generally happens is they have the package, they have the user research, and that's kind of like almost like a check mark.
Yeah.
So they can say they've done it, and they ignore it anyway and start the way that they want to. So they kind of use their hunches anyway, but they have it. And I think it's like often, very, very often used as an excuse. So internally it's used as an excuse to, if the product fails, you can kind of say, well, the research said we should have done this, which I really don't like. It takes the responsibility off the product team. And I think that one of the reasons it's so prevalent is because agencies want to do these really long research phases, and companies take that habit and try to make it work internally. And I can totally understand it, because we used to do exactly that.
Yeah.
We used to ask, we used to tell our clients that we wouldn't even start a project unless we did a few weeks of research, because we genuinely thought that was the way you had to do it. And it didn't really matter if we did the research, we still end up, like the team and us still ended up going with our hunches anyway. And then
but you'd still at least like make your hunches somehow tangible, like you say. It's like you couldn't do the research, and still people are going to have like a few vague ideas, but you still need to make this prototype and put it in front of people anyway. So it almost didn't make it. It didn't shortcut our way to the prototype. You just often thought, well, we could have just made that already,
exactly.
And put that in front of people.
I think that I kind of, for the people listening to the podcast, constantly talking about sprint, but I think it's an interesting anchor to talk about this from, because I think that's currently, if you look at on Twitter, at these designers getting very, very angry about the research part of it. Did you hear that bird?
Yes, I know.
I heard that bird right deep in my ear.
This was not a Foley added in afterwards.
That was an actual bird. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, because on the one hand, I think, okay, it seems like a lot of the people who are getting very annoyed are worried about losing these long contracts on one hand. And on the other hand, it's like they just don't believe it, maybe because they haven't, because that's the way they work now, and they just don't want to change that. But I'm not really convinced that every single project, let me just actually go to something more blunt. If you look at products that are successful right now, like Airbnb, like Slack, like a lot of the things that these companies want to kind of be, these high growth products, these didn't start with a user research phase. These things actually came out of thin air, out of the founders' ideas and hunches, very, very focused on these hunches.
Or they had built something internally to satisfy their own needs.
Exactly.
And found out, okay, if we do it like this, or repurpose that idea.
Exactly. And I think that what happens is that other companies see products like this, they go onto their blog and they read about the research they do. But this is the research they're doing for granular fixes. Like let's how would we improve this feature, or how do we improve the onboarding? Actually, sometimes it makes sense to do research for these parts. Yeah. And I think that companies sometimes see that and say, we need to do the research from the very start. We cannot use our hunches. It's illegal to use your hunches in UX, because you have to understand the user and you have to have empathy. Also, by the way, the stupidest job advice in the world from designers is, how do I become a good designer? You have to have empathy. Yeah, but you have to have empathy. Okay, thank you very much. Great, that's really great advice. But I think it's like, it's just being skewed. People are seeing these products and they're just assuming that there was a very serious thought going behind it based on user research. But if you look inside some of the departments in Google and you ask these people, like we had an event recently where we interviewed one of the hardware engineers, and I was asking how did you guys come up with this, and how did you, before you went into manufacturing, how did you know that it was the right thing? And they were like, yeah, we tested it in the cafeteria after we built it. And this is a successful product. This is not like something that just failed. And I think that approach is not to be ignored as well. Like that your hunch can also be right. But then testing it with real people, even if they're just in the cafeteria, immediately gave them feedback to fix it. And I think there's like this almost romantic view of how UX and product design is supposed to work based on a lot of the things that agencies put out there.
Well, yeah, and I don't think even that when people criticize the sprint or when they get worried about people not doing research, I don't think that that's actually like, I don't think there's any malicious intent there or people are trying to mislead anyone. I think that you do what you do, and when you get good results doing that, you know, I think it's easy to forget in some cases for agencies to forget how hard some of the things they do are. I think it's hard to understand how like doing that research in the right way is difficult. Not everyone can pick that up and do it well. And finding a situation where the person who does the research is credible and able to match the results to what the business needs in order to make decisions, that's hard. And I've seen that fail many times inside organizations that were sophisticated because it's very difficult. If you come in as an agency, or if you come in with like a company that's already doing it really well and you look at those examples, you think, oh sure, like it's great. So they may be getting value out of doing it, but I think to say if you don't do your design process in this way, you're doing it wrong. It's unfair, and I think they're just forgetting how hard some of the things that they do actually are. And I think sometimes people haven't questioned whether they really have to do all of the steps in order to get to the outcome.
You have to have your 12 personas before you do anything.
yeah. Now, personas would be a topic for another.
But in the way you say it there, Jake, it's interesting because you can say that the design sprint, like you said, it's very hard to come across people, let's say like Michael, who can, not only go out and ask the right questions and be comfortable with that, but then turn that into or communicate the results.
Actionable results.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's almost, and you're saying sprint is the user research. It's like making dummies like John and I be able to actually succeed at user research because in some way the sprint is user research.
And that was what's so cool about what Michael was doing at Google Ventures was he was doing this kind of research over and over again, but he was also trying to teach the companies how to do it for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
And so in the sprint process, we tried to sort of like get this sort of essence of Michael's brain like in there so that if you just did it, you would get, it's not as if you're going to all of a sudden have 20 years of experience doing research, but you will get this one really good interview. You can do it. And it is harder to do that in context where you don't have a prototype.
That's right.
I also think often that people, you guys both made this point about like building confidence, like often hunches can turn out to be right. And I was talking to, this is a little name droppy, but I was talking to Tim Brown, who's the CEO of IDEO, about design sprints. And Tim was saying like one thing that he thinks is really cool about design sprints is that he's seen many cases where their designers in their first thought about how to solve a problem, somewhere in those initial sketches will be the thing that they ultimately produce. And it's the early seed of it, but he said one thing that's cool about a design sprint is it gives our designers a chance to go with those hunches and go further and faster with those hunches, and sometimes maybe get way ahead. And that we all want to feel confident and feel like we've done all of the steps. And just like you guys were saying in the early days of Aj&Smart, you wanted to be diligent and do the right process. And I certainly felt like that earlier in my career. And I feel like the design sprint was kind of like boiling down, okay, what is the stuff? And if you don't have to have it to get to a good result, like don't keep it in there. And long drawn out research, I don't know. I'll give an example though. This company we talk about in the book, Flatiron Health, and they super complicated. They're making software for cancer care clinics. Michael did a bunch of research before we did the sprint to understand like how are they making decisions, basically to help us do the map. And if you do research ahead of time, ahead of a design sprint, and you can deliver it in the form of like, here's what I suggest you use for the map. Here's what I suggest are some of the sprint questions you might think about. And Michael he sort of led us in even the formation of the steps we do on Monday, but that mapping of the research output to how you start a sprint is a great way to do it, and to do that like preliminary research and really make it sing in a design sprint. It's that sometimes that huge PDF or like that long, boring slide deck that we've all been in. That's what you want to avoid, and that's where research credibility really drops. And like it sometimes it might work if you are an agency and they're paying you to come in, but it doesn't necessarily work internally. So
I like that thought that it's almost like for the Monday. I mean, for us in our sprint, it's like you can almost think of this Monday as the executive summary of that huge research.
Yeah.
It's like just basically what is the customer journey. We can do the whole empathy map here, which is like, and I love in the book as well how you talk about like if you do this enough, you recognize patterns almost regardless of what industry you're working in or what product you're kind of working on at that time. This like that kind of trigger discovery, these kind of like bits that customers move through. You just start recognizing these patterns after a while. And it's nice to have that formula, like you say, like if you just have this executive summary pulled out of all of this research there and start with that, then we can start letting our initial ideas somehow bring them to life, right? Like follow those.
What did Michael actually do? What sort of research did he do? Did he interview people?
Yeah, he went around with some folks from the Flatiron team and interviewed people who work at cancer care clinics to understand like what's going on when a patient comes in and you have to make a decision about treatment. What are the steps? Yep. And then you talk to a few different clinics, and then pretty soon he's got like, okay, I know what the map sort of looks like. I know what questions they're asking at different stages.
Did you guys still have to redraw the map on the Monday?
Yeah, because we still had to understand it and get it booted up into like short-term memory, right? But the other trick that Michael would do for sort of pre-research is, in fact, he wrote a blog post about this called, I think it's like, if you search for like free prototypes, Michael Margolis, you'll find it. He would basically run the sprint, the kind of research that it talks about at the end of the sprint, where you show people prototypes. Mm-hmm. He would use that with other companies' products that were in the space. Right. No prototype at all. And he would just say like, oh, here's these, 4 products or 3 products that I found. Get people to look at those and talk about them and compare them. And in a couple instances, we would start the sprint like the Friday before, basically watch the research, watch him conduct those interviews. And it was, as he put it, he's like, those other products are like free prototypes. You don't have to make them. They're already there. You can learn from them before you even start. And that's like also a way to kind of get a head start. But that is going to be sometimes a harder starting place for if you're a facilitator, if you're trying to introduce it. You have to have that credibility. And Michael came in with that credibility. Yeah. He's from the investor. He's been doing this forever. It's not always easy inside a team to start there. So that's why like the research question is a really rich one, because the people who make that criticism, like they're not wrong. Like you should, if you can start with research, you'll probably be ahead of the game, but you don't always have to.
Right. I think that's a perfect place to end this episode.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So thanks so much for watching or listening, and goodbye from California. Bye.
Adios, as they say.
Je suis goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Product Breakfast Club with Jake Knapp and Jonathan Courtney. You can check out past episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. We have many more great discussions coming soon. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please like, share, and leave us a review. The one thing that would really blow our minds is a 5-star review. Wow, that would be really nice. This podcast is produced by Kit, Brittany, and Patrick for AJ&Smart.